It's time we give back. So we'll see and show someone where love's at. Even if you don't give a dime, give your heart and share your time. Help somebody else in life. Give back. Let's give back. Don't forget.
Welcome to this edition of Ignite, Empower, Transform. I am your host, Hosea James Givan II, and we have a very special guest coming in from London, England, Ronald Sewell. Hey, Ronald, what's happening, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm great, thank you.
Good, man,
Good to be
good.
here.
Thanks for joining us again. Hey, man, can you just share with our audience a little bit about your history, brother, so we can get a better sense of who you are?
Okay, so I was born and bred in England in a place called Beckenham, Kent, Stone Park, Kent, in the UK. I stayed in the UK and then emigrated to the US in 1975, 12th of December. And then I stayed in the US from 1975 and went to school in New York. I went to PS 285, and then I went to My 11 in Tilden. And then after there, I went to Florida, to Miami to finish high school there. So I graduated, I think, in 1982 from North Miami Beach Senior High. I got into Northeastern University, and that's where I went and pursued my 5-year degree in criminology. After graduating, I then went on to New York and did work for a while. No, actually, sorry, I got that wrong. I got a scholarship to go back to Florida from Boston to do my master's. So I went to Florida International University and did a master's there in criminal justice research.
Okay.
And did that full time, and then finished in '89. And then I worked for a while with the Florida State Attorney's Office on the Janet Reno. And then I left from there, went to New York and worked in New York for about, I think, a year. And I was working with social services department in Queens and in Manhattan, looking at trafficking and sexual exploitation. That was my forte.
Wow, that's
And
that's
then,
that's pretty heavy, man.
yeah,
That must have
it
been
was,
pretty
and at the
intense.
time, and
So what
yeah,
period
it
what
was,
period
and
were you doing that particular piece? What years?
I did that from '89 to sort of 1990. So I was in New York for about a year.
That's before the
Because
world really understood the gravity and the depth of sexual trafficking around the world. So you kind of was there
yes,
before we really knew about it.
that's right. Yeah,
Hmm.
because at that time, what was happening, there was a lot of trafficking going on to the sort of South America, in the Latin quarters. We're talking uh, Guatemala, Peru. A lot of these countries were used at the time for trafficking, and then they would go from there to Europe, and then from Europe onto Afghanistan. I mean, the field was wide, and there was a lot of intelligence coming through the police at that time about where children were
Okay.
being trafficked.
Okay.
Miami was a big port.
Yeah, I can imagine. So
Yeah,
so
Miami was a big
so you
port.
went from that, and then I guess you landed back in London because that's where you are now. So when did you get back?
Yeah, and then I left in September of 1990. I came back to England, and when I came back to England, I did some traveling for a little bit around the world, and then I did Egypt for a while. Went to Thailand, Vietnam, India, um, Tokyo, came back to England and then started working there as a consultant to social services, particular area in child trafficking.
Okay.
And that was quite big at the time here. So I used the expertise that I knew in New York and sort of
Sure.
did the same thing here.
Okay.
Then I worked a little bit with repeat offenders, because that was what I studied for recidivism. So it was stuff around why these serial offenders keep committing crime, and why are they committing this crime, where they getting that from, and a lot of them kept doing it because they felt safe within going back into the institutions. A lot of them were coming from broken homes. They couldn't manage to go back out in the communities because they weren't trained. They didn't feel they had anything to live for.
So you're
And
saying,
so,
just so I understand this correctly, you're saying that those repeat offenders felt more
yeah,
comfortable, more at peace, more in sync in a jail than they did in society.
that's right.
Wow, that's rather sad.
And
That's
it
rather
was very
sad.
sad, and that was a cycle. So if you can imagine where what's lacking, I think, was a lot of the role modeling for young people. Whilst there were lots of programs to help them, they had a lot of community centres, youth centres, and stuff, but they didn't have the numbers in terms of role modeling. So what started emerging in the UK was a lot of young people who was disenfranchised, disillusioned, coming from black minority ethnic backgrounds, and not having the access to the resources, I guess, that you would have, for children across the diaspora. It just wasn't there. And the youth organizations that we had, the youth clubs, they were starting to close at that period of time. So a lot of them were closing down. They didn't have anything in place to report.
give me a time frame now. So we're talking about the
So we're
early to
talking
mid
sort of
90s.
93, 94, 95,
So I
96.
see a parallel between some of the things was actually happening here in the United States, because around that same time we also saw here in our country that same unfortunate circumstance where we saw a lot of after school programs being closed, a lot of Saturday programs being closed, a lot of youth related programs. The resources
That's
was
right.
dwindling. And so it's uncanny
Yes.
how there's a correlation in terms of just the timing of this happening.
Yes. The same things. And in fact, one of the biggest loss in the UK was the national draft military. I think they call it I don't know what they call it in America. I can't
They
remember.
just call it the
But
draft.
signing up for the draft.
Yeah, they just call it the draft.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so we had a similar thing here where you had to go post 16. You had to go into the the services, and so they stopped that, and that was a sort of a great tragedy, because the young boys especially didn't have any place to go after that. And if they were closing the youth and community clubs, then they were just left to go on the streets.
So back up,
I
just
think
back up, so we can understand this just a little better, my brother. So what you're saying is that one of the vehicles, one of the means by which we were able to kind of keep our young people out of harm's way into something more constructive was what we call the military or the armed forces, where it was required for some of them to have to participate in that. So that they eliminated that? Is that what happened?
yes,
So
that stopped. Yeah.
so is that it was a financial, where they could no longer financially support the program? It came down to, because I don't, we once had a draft here up until I'll say through the 70s, and then at some point it was eliminated. But it was primarily due to the fact that the Vietnam War had ended, and there wasn't really any need to have people required to go into the draft. But in England, for it seems like a long period of time, it was mandatory that young people had to offer some service in what we would call the armed forces. I guess you call it.
Yes.
Okay. Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
I was not aware of that. I was
Yeah,
not
it
aware
was
of that.
very similar. It was called the National Service, and it was compulsory. Once you got to 16, you had to have signed up, and you had to have gone and done at least 18 months. And so they stopped that, and that I think there was nothing to replace it, for instance. And I know some of it was money. There was lots of sort of political upheaval about it. It shouldn't have been done, and blah blah blah. People are still referring to it now. If they still had it, maybe the crime would have been reduced in the city areas. So there was nothing to replace this. And then on top of that, they started closing a lot of the youth and community organizations. So that was like a double whammy in a sense. So you had an influx of young boys and girls who were then ending up on the streets. And then
Okay.
we had the introduction of crack cocaine. Now, when I left New York, they had that already,
Yes.
but it had started to happen here. And
Oh
so that was coming on the streets.
yeah.
A lot of institutions or residential establishment weren't aware of what was going on, but what they got was a lot of young boys and girls who were exhibiting.
Okay. We're gonna need to take a quick break, uh, brother Sewell, and then we'll come right back. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I see the future is really bright for me. The high school diploma is just added to the confidence, and now I feel unstoppable.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Welcome back. We have Ronald Sewell from London, England, one of the social workers there and one of the leaders in working with our young people in the United Kingdom. Thanks again, Ronald. Now, we were last talking about the situation that was taking place in London, where the crack epidemic pretty much took storm. As you know, it devastated so many communities here in the United States. I recall that period so well. Unfortunately, it was the darkest period that I could recall living in the United States, living in New York City at that time. It was like a war zone at times. You really couldn't. It was not familiar. It was a time where, like you kind of mentioned, a lot of the aggression and a lot of it just was not a safe place. The crime was up. Was not safe on the streets. Your car was getting broken into. Your homes were getting broken into. You were getting robbed on the street, and it was a regular occurrence in many communities. And then shortly after that, the gangs kind of started to have more influence. So let's talk more about what's going on there.
Yeah, and so we saw that shift where the crack cocaine was coming onto the market, and then yes, we had at the time I was then consulting with Southwark Borough Council. And so throughout most of my career, what I've been doing is working with the local government and local government agencies as a consultant. And so what I would do is sort of bring my expertise there, work for short contracts and then move on. And so what I was privileged enough to then go all to other parts of the UK and then travel to conferences throughout Europe. And so I got a feel of what was going on, and this was going Europe-wide. So we had it in the UK, we had it in Germany, we had it in Amsterdam, and the difference, I think, it would places like that where drugs is legalized differently, so the level of abuse was not as much, if you like.
Yes.
But they still had pockets of So Holland was an interesting place, although they had drug problems there, but it was not on the same level because a lot of the drugs in Holland was legalized. So people didn't abuse it because they knew it was there and they could get it.
Right.
But what they did very well was manage it. They managed because it was contained. You had to do it in a shop. You couldn't be on the street. And if you were, that sort of thing. When you got to the red light district, it had to be managed. You had medical facilities. People were there. It was mandatory that they had to go and get sorted out and things like that. So it was managed in a way that you didn't see people sticking with needles sticking out their arms, or you would see that people were in a corner, getting tanked up. So it was different. But when you come over to London now, you then had pockets or areas where it became bad, and you had the stealing and the crime and that concentration of you can't go there, you can't go, there. So that sort of whole storm hit the UK, and they didn't know how to deal with that. They started getting the gangs, and today, if we look at today to where those things were, it has gone tenfold. We have in London alone over 200 different gangs.
Wow. Wow. Do you have the
Yes,
Bloods and the
and
Crips
that's
there?
just it's similar. It's similar, but it's
Okay.
everything is called. They call it postcode gangs over here.
Okay.
So depending on what postcode, or a zip code. You say zip code in America, we say postal code. So
Okay.
so depending on what areas you're from.
So
So
it's very
I'm
regionalized. It's
SE20.
very territorial in terms of
Yes,
the
that's right.
city gangs. Okay. Wow. That's
That's right.
that's
And
that's
so the young people that know that, it's then the intelligence is then shared. So one of the committees that I sit on is called a multi-agency risk panel, MARP, and that's done once a month, every 3 weeks, where a group of 26 to 30 professionals, we sit down, mostly police, Liverpool intelligence, the Department of Defense. We have international intelligence agencies. We Skype in people from Hong Kong, from uh, Italy, Spain, other parts of Europe that, are linked with trafficking, because they're also using children to exploit, for drugs and, the stuff that they have to do. Of course, there's this whole shift of what's going on in Yemen, and also in Nigeria, and also in other countries. So under the guise of them using it for immigration purposes, they're also using the children for trafficking as well.
Wow. Wow. So we're
So,
seeing a trend here in America where there is a movement afoot where they're actually decriminalizing marijuana, which is I guess consistent to some of the things that you saw when you were in Holland. And I think what we will ultimately find is some of the same positive aspects in terms of the government having more control and being able to regulate the drug industry more effectively, where we will hopefully get the support that is needed for those that need it most, but also it's a monitoring of the process. So I think we saw success in the European countries, and I think we're going to see hopefully that same kind of positive effect here in our country as well.
Well, although I have a different interpretation, a different spin on it, because I also believe that
Kick it, brother.
The entire industry, when it comes to the drugs, period, not just cannabis, has always been used to criminalize those, because they know that a lot of money is into this. The amount of money that goes on when it comes to cannabis haulage and usage and stuff, and they're criminalizing people and say you can't do it because it's illegal, blah blah blah. And now all of a sudden there's a shift to make it legal. Especially today as we speak, there's a young man here, just came from Canada with his mother. He has, I think, up to 100 fits a day, and he was about to die. The Parliament turned it down and said it was legal for him to have cannabis oil, because the mother just came back. She
Wow.
declared at customs just yesterday that she had the cannabis oil on her. They took it off her and said it's illegal, she can't bring it in. As soon as the son went back home, he started getting ill again. It's been on the news all day.
Wow.
And just about 3 hours ago, they had the MPs got calls to come, and they had an emergency meeting, and all of a sudden they can give it back to her again. So,
wow. That's incredible.
The politics behind this. Yeah, because that to me, that's all a smokescreen for what's really going to happen, because they're going to be forced to legalize it, because they see the money. And all these years they've been arresting young black men and stuff like that, and saying, oh, it's a drug problem.
Yes.
When they know bloody well that the revenue that generates from cannabis alone, because if you think about the Caribbean, if I remember there, my grandparents, we always had marijuana. It was just like you walked pass it on the
Right,
street.
right,
You know,
right,
it was
right,
there. It was just growing as a regular plant,
right,
and it was used medicinally for so many things.
right.
When we were growing up, and we would drink the tea, we would even have a bath in it, you know, and
Wow.
so that
Okay.
was part of my upbringing and my understanding. So it was a
Right.
shock to my system when I went on holidays there, be with my grandparents, and then came back to England and the States, and then they were saying, well, it's illegal. And I said, well, how come it's not illegal out there?
Right.
And and we're talking the real McCoy,
Right.
because in Jamaica you saw it through the hose and the coconut shells or whatever, and that's how they smoked it on the beach. And then so if one person was doing it, the whole beach would
Right.
because it was so powerful. It
Right.
was
Right.
really,
Right. Right. Everybody was lit.
so yes,
Right.
so it's
Right.
interesting now that
Right.
they're coming to talk about make it
Okay.
legal and all of this stuff,
Ronald, we're
you
gonna have
know.
to take another quick break, and we're gonna touch back on in that part of the conversation, and we're gonna talk a little bit about immigration, because we're dealing with a lot of immigration issues here in America, and I know
Yep.
that you're doing the same. You're involved the same in the UK. So just give us another break
Yep.
for a commercial, and we'll be right back.
I'm your host, Rachel Cheeks Givan. Tune into Ignite, Empower, Transform every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. on BronxNet.
Give back. Let's give back.
Okay, we're back with Ronald Sewell, social worker consultant from the UK, and I'm going to ask, we're going through a time here in America, Ronald, where we're dealing with some crisis in terms of immigration. And I know the UK has been dealing with it as a result of the Brexit vote that took place June 23rd, 2016, how that impacted the country and some of the immigration laws that have come forth since. And we're dealing with some gut-wrenching stories of young people being separated from their parents. I know you've been dealing with this a little longer than we have, so just give us an update in terms of how things have been developing in the UK as a result of the immigration laws that have been put in place.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, it's here because of we went through the Windrush period, and that's a period when the UK government had gone to the West Indies, Jamaica, Cuba, Antigua, Trinidad, and there was a massive shortage of police officers. There was transport workers, people working in the medical field, especially medicine. And so there was this big, thing of inviting, because of course these countries were colonized by the British colonies, the Jamaica and
Which
Trinidad
you're of
Barbados.
Jamaican ancestry.
Yeah, I'm Jamaican extracts. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
And so my parents and my grandparents, and they all came, and they were given British passports. And so
this was
they
around
were
right after, if I'm not mistaken, this is right after World War II, around 1947, somewhere in that
That's right,
range.
because of the Brexit and what happened with that particular vote. Now it's brought up the whole immigration issues. But interestingly enough, the Europeans, a lot of them that came from Romania, from Sarajevo, from West and Eastern Europe, they were more worried about what's going to happen to them. Interestingly enough, all it's been doing is targeting and focusing on people from across the diaspora. So we're talking, West Indians, Africans, Asians, Trinidad, people from, they call it third world, and there's a debate about this place being more third world, but we won't go there right now. That's another conversation. And
Okay.
and it has a lot of implications.
Can we
people that are
just
here.
hold a sec? Can we just kind of just give a definition for Brexit, because I know we've been using the term, but I just want to make sure people understand. That is Brexit. It was the separation of Britain
Yes.
leaving the European
Yes.
Union. So at one time,
Yes, that's
Britain
right.
was a part of the European Union. So
That's right.
the vote was to exit, to depart from the European
Yes.
Union. So they felt that was negatively impacting their economy, and they wanted to have more control of their economy from what it sounds.
Yes, precisely.
Let's change
Yeah.
let's change gears, brother, and let's try to end this show on a lighter note. Let's talk about the royal wedding. Tell us, what are your thoughts about Prince Harry and Meghan?
Well, I am not surprised for Harry. He was always a young man that I thought would be challenging to the monarch. I think he was always going to do his own thing. I think he was always going to make up his own mind and challenge them. I think he has a lot of his mum in him, and I'm really glad that he went out for what he wanted to do, and he's not one to be messed with. He was always going to do what he wanted to do. He was like that. You could see it in him as a child. So the others would be playing together, and he'll be off somewhere over in the outer Aberdeens, and he was just going to go for it. He's really showing them, really, I'm going to do what I want to do, and it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to respond to him as time goes on. Meghan, I like her a lot. I have a lot of respect for her. And I think the wedding and the actual preparation of it and what she did alone it spoke volumes. The
Right.
spring the pastor that she did over there from Chicago, I think he's
Right.
phenomenal. I've seen him in church.
Right.
The choir that she got, she went out
Right.
of her way to find
Right.
the choir. They were phenomenal. The young man the cellist, I thought he was amazing.
Wow.
And the way in which she put it together. So there was very much a presence of Afrocentricity in that wedding.
Okay.
And I really liked that. It came out and she ran things. He wanted her to have what she wanted. It was both their day, but her influence was stamped on that wedding. It was really loved. The British public really loved it. They're comparing it to nothing like they've ever seen before. It was well received. There's a big buzz at the moment. She appears to be getting along with the Queen very well. They're having a lot of fits of giggle, and she's getting to know her.
That's
of
a
course,
beautiful
there's
thing,
royal
man.
protocol. Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I think it's going to, open up some doors. Now, interestingly enough, the royal family is acting as if this is something new, but they've always been, but they've kept it. They've always been involved, and the Queen herself, her great-grandmother, is a black woman. She's dual heritage, or they used to call
Wow.
mulatto, or whatever.
And,
Yes,
and
Queen
I
Charlotte.
so this is not rumor. This is fact, because I did hear
This
that.
is
So you're
fact,
saying,
yeah.
oh, okay, wow, that's amazing. Hey, man, we're gonna
It's
have
fact.
to we're gonna have
If
to
you-
we're gonna have to we're gonna have you back again, but we're gonna have to cut this particular program. We've kind of maxed out on our time, man, and this has been a very educational, very informative interview, and you've shared a lot of valuable information with our Bronx community and worldwide community, because as you know, we are on YouTube. So, brother, my alpha brother, my dear alpha brother, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity brother, I thank you for taking this time. We have a 5-hour difference, so it's evening where you are. This is afternoon where we are, and I appreciate you
right,
taking
yeah.
the time with us, man.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
Okay, man. We're gonna have you back, okay?
Okay, no problem.
All right. Thank you
Take
very
care.
much. All right. 06. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Ignite, Empower, Transform. I am your host, Hosea James Givan II, and tune in every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. on BronxNet. Thanks for joining us.
I see all your smiles and all the tears showing down on your faces. But I know all the while it's gonna be okay. Yes, it is.